Welcome to the Nature of Sovereignty. I'm Ian Gaines, back from my break from Peru. So we're here safe and sound. I have on Dawdu Amantana, who is a Bitcoin writer. We talk about the importance of having Black Bitcoin writers in the space, also culturally shifting from a high time preference to a low time preference, and overall how he got here, this journey, being a storyteller, being a writer, and giving some instructions and advice of how to follow in his footsteps. This guy is a great writer. You're going to see a whole lot more from him, and a man I truly respect. So enjoy the show. Welcome to Nature of Sovereignty. Today I have on Dawdu Amantana, who is a Bitcoin writer, entrepreneur, and overall badass. And it's a pleasure to have you on, finally.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate the offer and the opportunity. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, man. We got connected. Now it's been maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and of course through Bitcoin Vegan. He's the ultimate connector, and he hits me up. He's like, Ian, I know you do this writing. I know you do this media thing. I got a great writer, and he's ambitious. He's building out his own career, his own pathway. We got to find something to do together. We got to bring our minds together and bring something big. And soon as I read a couple of your Bitcoin magazine articles, I was like, oh, this guy is the real deal. So tell me a little bit about starting in Bitcoin and making that decision to write Bitcoin articles and why that's important.
Yes, a great question, Ian. My background is pretty interesting. So, like the importance of having Black Bitcoin writers. Honestly, if you look at a lot of the writing that has been created in the Bitcoin space, it is few and far between in regards to African Americans. I, for one, plan on changing that. Black writers offer a perspective on things that is unique to the pulse of the culture. Like, good example is look at the impact like James Baldwin or Ta-Nehisi Coates or Toni Morrison has done for American literature. When Bitcoin Zay wrote Bitcoin in Black America, it gave white America the opportunity to revisit the fact that we tend to be last to the party in economics, innovation, and technology. Since there's so much mistrust in the Black community when it comes to money and sovereignty, writing coming directly from that community, or writers coming from directly from that community that are informed about Bitcoin almost have a duty to continue to educate, elucidate, and inspire the synergy between Black economics, Bitcoin, and blockchain technology.
Right. And it's so important for us to be represented in the space,
Yeah.
right? Because this is an industry where we finally have an asset that's completely decentralized. There's no central authority, there's no gatekeepers. So it truly is a moment in time where we can take the responsibility on to ourselves, right? And build that financial wealth, but more importantly, tell our stories, tell it culturally from our perspective. And when I was reading a couple of your articles, you always keep that in mind. And one that you wrote for Black Bitcoin Billionaires is Stacking Sats is the New Black. We'll definitely post the link in the YouTube so people can catch up on it. But um, one of your quotes, you start off with Bitcoin may be the most intelligent move African Americans can make with their money. So, why is that?
That is a great question, and I wrote that quote in there to really stick out to people and to kind of have people question that narrative. So to answer your question, why I believe that it's the most intelligent thing that Black people can do right now is because you're dealing with a peer-to-peer digital money that has no barrier of entry. So traditionally in our community, and historically in our community, we have been kind of blackballed outside of the economic circle. So with something like Bitcoin, which is decentralized, means that there's no centralized entity, corporation, or person that can seize or squat or remove you from that economic growth. Bitcoin allows you to buy in, hold it securely, and not have to worry about a political party or a government or a racist institution taking that money away from you generationally or just right now in the present moment. So something like Bitcoin is very easy to get into as an asset. A lot of traditional assets or investments, like on the stock market, for example, you have a minimum buy-in. You might have a $10,000 buy-in for an index fund, for example. A lot of people from our community don't have that available source of capital to just freely invest in something of that magnitude. So Bitcoin allows people from our community, you can get in. I think Cash App allows you to buy $1 worth is like the minimum. So using something like Cash App, for example, you can buy Bitcoin and you can start investing for not only yourself, but your family.
Mm. And it's also understanding our financial power. Really, I think in one of your articles, it may be this one, but you say that in Nielsen, African Americans have a whopping $1.2 trillion of
Yep.
spending power. And I was
Yeah.
doing the calculations. It's like 1.2, between 1.2 and 1.4, but that would literally make us like the 13th, 12th, or 13th largest GDP in the world, right? So we do have assets, we do have purchasing power, but it's, I guess, in this new time period now is really learning how to allocate that, right, and where to allocate that so we can preserve that purchasing power. And you talk about time preference. That's a concept that us Bitcoiners we always we always go back and forth with, and having a low time preference versus high time preference. Which high time preference, like you're uh, using your current situation, and you're valuing the current state more than your future gains or future value. And low time preference is that you value your future gain or future value more than your time right now. And culturally, there is a relationship we have with time preference, and I think a lot of times it may lean more to the high time preference. And we was talking a little bit before this, just interested of why do you think that has developed culturally, and what we can do about that.
So I think why that happens in our community is because to be African American or a person of color in America, it's almost like a fleeting objective. It's almost like something that you get it how you live. Like I put that in the article where I talk about people of color tend to have a get it how you live mentality because we don't know what the next day may bring, and we don't know what we may encounter. Whether it's being pulled over or going to the bank or doing things that day-to-day Americans do, we kind of have a different experience being African Americans in this country. And I think that generationally over time, you've had people in the past that have purchased land or bought real estate or did certain things, and that real estate was seized from them or squatted upon. And just culturally, also, I think that when you look at the culture from a smaller perspective, a lot of people are taking money and they're using money as like a form of a flip. They don't have that delayed gratification. So one thing that I want to really articulate in my articles, and I talk about this, is people of color having delayed gratification and a strong financial IQ. And where that comes from is that you can know about money, you can know about the banking system, but you have to understand that the most wealthy people in the world have delayed gratification, which means they'll buy a stock or a bond and they'll sit on it for a decade or maybe 20 years, and they won't sell it. They'll continue to just pass that wealth on generationally. And I think that people from our community, we have a big mistrust with banks. We have a big mistrust with investing. So Bitcoin allows people from our community to um, have what you call a trustless system, where you don't need a peer to like during a peer-to-peer transaction. Let's say I give you $1, there's no middleman in between me and you saying, hey, I need a 50-cent fee in order for this transaction to be approved. Bitcoin allows me to send you $1 directly without any intermediary. And I think that for people of color, that is a huge game changer for not only our community, but how we view generational wealth.
Mhm. Now, some people will say, oh, this low time preference, that sounds good in theory, but I have bills today. I can't save up for Bitcoin and have this digital nest egg when I need to feed my kids today, when I have rent due, or God forbid if there's medical bills, right? So, how do we make that shift into a lower time preference when we're faced with so much immediate issues and problems?
Yes, that's a great question. I also bring this up in the article as well. And I think that one of the biggest solutions to that is dollar cost averaging. Hill Harper, who has his own app, the Black Wall Street, shameless plug, shout out to Hill Harper.
Mhm.
Um,
Shout out.
he kind of really harps on dollar cost averaging, which means that invest as much as you can that allows you to be comfortable enough to make that investment. So it's just about getting off zero. Some people
Mhm.
might be able to afford $50 a week. Some people may be able to afford $10 a week. And as you learn more about the asset, you learn more about what Bitcoin is, you'll start to gain more conviction in the asset, which means that you'll start to find ways to kind of get off zero or escape that state of lack. So you might acquire a second job, or you might use some skill set that you have as a form of a wage or an earning or a tip to say, all right, when I get my check from my second job, instead of just spending that on something that I might not really necessarily need, I'll
Mhm.
put that into Bitcoin. So I think that dollar cost averaging gives people a set schedule to be disciplined on just getting their foot off the ground with investing. And I think that that's one of the best ways for people from our community to start really investing in Bitcoin, dollar cost averaging.
Yeah, 100%. When it comes to dollar cost averaging, that is something that we at BBB always preach. Whether you have $5, $10, $15, just act like that's a tax and put it into your digital wallet. You can go to the different exchanges because you know that this money that you are putting into Bitcoin is going to preserve over time. It's going to hold its wealth. And that is the shift that we're currently making as a community, as a group, and why we have educators like you who are on. Because, man, I was just looking at, Wall Street Trapper.
Yep.
Yeah, he was talking about Jerome Powell and that this was the highest sell off this year in terms of stocks, 69 billion, like over the year, and the year is not even over yet, right? So Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and they have a massive sell off.
Hmm.
So that goes to show that, oh, okay, we're in some choppy waters come the future. Like the biggest thing you can do is follow what the billionaires are doing. If they're looking at their assets and saying, okay, with the inflation, over 6% this year, over our 2% that it should be each year. We're in a more inflated economy. The billionaires are starting to sell off their assets. That fluctuates time to time. But there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be, right? That's one thing that will never fluctuate is a fixed supply, fixed income there rather than a Federal Reserve where they have the button on the printing press and they can inflate our money into oblivion.
Yep.
So that is just knowing those fundamental economic structures that exist today and know that we have alternatives that's outside of that. For the next concept that you bring in part two, you talk about Bitcoin is an accumulation race. Put that into perspective.
Okay, so like what people have to understand is that when you think about game theory, or you just think about not even game theory, because that might be too high level. We'll just put it like this. Imagine that someone told you that there is 21 million blocks of free open land that you can purchase, but you're on a time constraint. So you have 50 years, and anyone is free to purchase this 21 million acres of land, for example. All you have to do is come with money, and you can purchase this land, and you can buy as much of it as you want. There is no stipulation on how much you can own or what you can do with it once you own that land. Now, traditionally, when you look at people that own land, landholders, they don't really tend to sell off their land. They'll lease it, they'll have people build homes on it, they'll rent it out, but they always keep it generationally inside of their family structure or family heirs. They'll keep it with inside of their family. Bitcoin is very similar to that, where you can find yourself in a situation where you're buying an asset that is better than stocks, bonds, real estate, precious metals, the whole lot. And this is one of those times in history where we have a chance to really jump in and buy something that's going to be better than gold. It's going to be something that's really going to change the trajectory of our condition in the United States of America and across the diaspora. And I think that people, and especially people that are uninformed, they don't want to be last to the party or miss out on this generational wealth transfer. So Bitcoin is one of those things where um, you educate yourself on it, and then you just get off of zero, which means you go in and you start buying. You start accumulating as much as you can, and then you start telling the people next to you to start accumulating, and then you hope that that catches on, and then they just continue to buy and hold.
So, what do you say to the people who look at Bitcoin and say, I don't know, the Bitcoin community is very feverish when it comes to buy and hold, buy and hold. This sounds like a Ponzi scheme to me. I don't know. This digital money that's not tangible. I can't place it in my hand. And all they tell me to do is just buy, and never sell. And it sounds a little fishy,
Yeah,
because black folk, we'll look at it like, okay, what you selling to me now? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely. I think that, like the Black community, why I think that they need this asset, there's for many reasons, but like if you look at the history of the plight of the Black community, Bitcoin represents that opportunity for financial freedom, education, and inclusion for African Americans. You have things like Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration, high unemployment, and a lack of financial literacy. Bitcoin is that digital revolution that everybody talks about that, won't be televised. I think that it's wealth that you can harness and actually keep outside of government control. Look at the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, for example. That was once the epicenter of Black wealth in America. And ironically, it was burned down and a massacre ensued because of jealousy and rumors. Bitcoin is money and wealth that cannot be seized if you secure it properly via your private keys. You keep them secure and out of out of the hands of people that may use that to compromise you. You can transact with it peer to peer, like I said earlier, which means there's no middleman. That they can't charge you a fee to pass that money between two parties. Bitcoin is one of those things that has gone up for over 200% over the last decade. It has outperformed stocks, bonds, real estate, everything. And Bitcoin is something that's collectively mined. The rewards are divided amongst everyone who participates. There's no changes that can be made to the core code. It's all based on a consensus, which means that everyone inside of the Bitcoin network has to agree to make a change, not one or two people or one or two demographics. So we no longer have to boycott things like we had to do during the civil rights era if we don't agree with something, because Bitcoin is the best silent protest and it's the best store of value the Black community can own right now.
amen. Absolutely. This is the first time where we can take financial power into our own hands. And because every other time in history, there was someone else who controlled that power and could dictate to us what we had access to and what we couldn't have access to, just because of their perceptions of who we are. Now, because of technological advancements, we can take full autonomy over our finances, and we are the ones who can benefit the most from this. So those are great points. Now, one very interesting concept, which is completely new that I haven't heard. So I wanted to bring this up in your writings. There's a quote on part two. You say, I think it would be politically possible for the federal government to give every descendant of slaves in the US a fraction of a Bitcoin as reparations. I never thought of that.
Yeah,
But when reading that, I was like, oh wow, that could be possible.
yeah, yeah. I I'm glad that you brought that up because that was a point, that was kind of an idea that I wanted to throw out there to just have people of color understand that like the future is now and possibilities are endless. And when you start to think about, we can use 2020 for an example, during the whole Black Lives Matter movement. That was a unique place and time in history where, at least in my lifetime, where I actually saw institutions, people, companies, everything, people were starting to really look at the Black experience differently. They were starting to really open up their ears and eyes to see our situation, our plight, and some of our suffering that we've endured in the United States of America. And I think that there was a small window there of opportunity that we could have essentially asked for whatever we wanted, and it probably would have happened. So I think as time goes on, you're going to start to see more people having empathy for people of color in this country due to some of the hardships that we face. And I think that the government in the future may possibly, during all this reparations talk, may say, hey, instead of giving you 40 acres and a mule that we never gave you, how about a certain percentage of a digital currency or a Bitcoin that we can distribute and divide it up, 100 million ways, and we can send it to every African American person in this country that owns a cell phone, has access to the internet, or some form of a digital wallet. And I think that that's something that maybe in the future people may bring to the table to these politicians to say, hey, this may be a solution to some of the hardships that we endured, and kind of a reward for ultimately building the United States because we really built it.
100%. My only thought that came up just now is like, oh man, the only fear that I would have is that they distribute it through CBDCs. That's
Yeah.
the only thing,
Yep.
because they want to be able to track the money that they send to their citizens. So I'm like, okay, that's a little nefarious, but yeah, we'll keep our eye out in 2035.
You never
It's like,
know.
man, we talked about this in the 2020s. I
Yep.
knew they was going to do it this way.
Yep.
Um, but you are definitely a creative educator and a great storyteller. And for those who are interested in writing or media or education, how could they follow the similar path as you?
Good question. What's interesting about my path is like I'm kind of like an unorthodox writer. So like I don't have like a fancy MFA degree, or like, I didn't go to like some prestigious school for English as my major. I kind of like got it out the mud and did it from the trenches where I just, there's a quote from Richard Bach that he says, um, an amateur writer is just a professional that didn't quit. And that's one of those things that I really live by, where you just write a ton, you read a ton, and you just become a better writer. And what I did was, I was traditionally just writing books. Like I have 3 books out, and I just wrote books about various topics that I was inspired by. And then the light bulb went off about a year ago where I said, you know what, there's not a lot of people in the space that are talking about the African American demographic. Of course, you have Bitcoin Zay, you have some people in the space that have written books, but I was always looking for those short and sweet articles. Like Coates has a lot of articles for the Atlantic where he'll have like a 5 or 10 minute read where you can just read about the quote unquote black condition or what's going on in the space, and you could just get that information very quickly while you're on the train or commuting. And I wanted to create something like that for Bitcoiners, in particular BBB, or people coming from the African American community, where we can be informed about some of the struggles or the inspirations that we have while adopting and acquiring Bitcoin. So I just went full force with that. And I started to really do a lot of blogs on Medium. And then I started to write for Bitcoin Magazine to get the word out and to get the information out that we also have a say in articulation and literary work.
Mhm. Yeah, and you do it in a way that is easily digestible. So with that 5 to 10 minute read, people when they're on their train, they can read the full article, digest it, take it in and be about their day. And I think that is a great strategy. And it's easy for people to take in what you're saying and what you're trying to get across. So for you personally, what's next on the board?
So for me personally, what's next on the board is I'm going to continue to write about Bitcoin on a lot of these publishing platforms such as Bitcoin Magazine and BBB, which will educate people on what Bitcoin is and its potential to change the lives of billions of people. My next steps for 2022, I'm currently working on a new book under my publishing company, UE Publishing, but I can't disclose what that's about yet, but I will say that it is about Bitcoin. I'm also looking at new opportunities. If any of these big crypto platforms are in need of content writers or editors, check out my website, www.iamdawdu.com, for all my books, articles, and publications for Bitcoin Magazine. And I'm just, I'm here to work and I'm here to continue to write about interesting stories and interesting perspective from the Black experience while we continue to adopt and accumulate the greatest monetary asset that man has ever created.
Awesome. I know you just gave the website, but where else can people find you? Like social media or what have you?
Yeah, so people can find me on Twitter at Dawdu_Dawdu_DAWDU, or you can find me at Instagram at just Dawdu DAWDU.
Great. Dadu, you already know. Absolute pleasure. We're going to keep in contact. We're going to keep the iMessages keep rolling. But you're one of the people in the space that I truly, truly respect the work that you do and how important it is. So thank you so much for leading the charge.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate it.